All right, I want to start the same question I asked our Arjun Gopal earlier. We have a lot of notable voices out here that believe that this is an overreaction to the stock, and the stock actually has the potential to go positive throughout the trading day. What was your take on the quarter, and do you think the downside move was an overreaction?
Yeah, Frank, I think the stock's up today. And to my point, I think it's really when you look at the guidance, and that's not even factoring in China. I mean, China could be an incremental 2-5 billion. And they this for the first time, Jensen talked about maybe giving a little sneak peek. China revenue could be 50% growth. I mean, that was just eye popping. And I think as investors digest this, this is a stock that's up, and I think a further validation for the AI revolution as well as Nvidia.
All right. The miss was on data center revenue. It was a very slight miss in all fairness, but it was a miss. How should we read that? I know it doesn't include any China guidance, but the fact that it wasn't a blowout quarter for data center when we continue to see these CapEx investments by the hyperscalers and other companies.
Look, Frank, I view it as noise because, in my view, you got to look at the story with China. You can't look at it excluding China. And I think when you look at this quarter, you look at next quarter, and what I think the most important thing Jensen talked about is the 50 billion, the 50% growth. You know, when you're thinking about what China could be, I mean, you put it all together. This is a story that is actually just going into acceleration mode. So there's nothing here that makes me less bullish. I mean, I actually think you're more bullish as a validation point in terms of what you're seeing without China.
All right, Dan, we know you're one of the biggest bulls when it comes to tech on the street, but there are some other factors here. First, we had a report yesterday that China's trying to triple its chip output. Arjun Gopal mentioned there was a Chinese chip company that saw its profits increase by 4,000%. So there seems to be some rising domestic competition, and the Chinese have also voiced some concerns about security issues with these H20 chips, and also just, I guess, some hurt feelings about some things that the Commerce Secretary had. I mean, aren't these some real issues for this company's ability to sell in China and grow those revenues that they've forecasted? But aren't there some real headwinds along the way?
Yeah, look, no doubt. I mean, Jensen's going to have to play that 10% politician, 90% CEO, the back and forth between DC and Beijing. Look, the biggest chip on this poker table is Nvidia. But it comes down to in China, they want Nvidia chips. It's the only, to me, not just game in town, it is the chip fueling the AI revolution. And I think as you start to see this play out, you're going to see that China market continue to expand massively because they're years ahead relative to any other competitor, including Huawei. And I think that is just the reality as this all plays out. There's going to be a lot of noise, but at the end of the day, the top of that mountain is the godfather of AI, Jensen Nvidia.
All right, let's talk about investing right now. It's hard to call this buying the dip because this stock's run up about 35% since its last earnings, and it's only pulled back right now about 1.75%. But when it comes to Nvidia or even the Nasdaq, again, hard to say buy the dip because the Nasdaq futures are just very slightly in the red. Do you see this as a buying opportunity? And if you thought that the stock was frothy before earnings, isn't it still basically kind of frothy?
Yeah, I mean, to that last point, I actually think it's cheap relative to where I think numbers are going. I think Street's underestimating numbers 25-30% next few years, especially when you factor in China, what ultimately this could look at. And in my view, you combine this with what we saw from the hyperscalers and what we're seeing in terms of overall earnings, what you've seen from Snow, what you've seen from MongoDB. You combine that all, of course, Palantir. This now, the story is playing out. The next phase of AI revolution is playing out. And that's bullish not just for NVIDIA, but for tech. And I think tech stocks rally more into year end.
All right, Dan, I'm going to ask you a tough question, at least for you. Is there any part of the tech landscape that you're seeing weakness in following this report? Like we see CoreWeave up, we see some other stocks just fractionally lower. Is there any part of the AI tech trade that you have questions about following this report related to the data center numbers or anything else?
Look, it's not necessarily on that side, but like when you look at Adobe and you look at software, I mean, this is just further shows like what could be eating their lunch, right? That it's putting more software on the defensive. Salesforce, Adobe, I think Salesforce will actually be able to come out of this strong. But look, I think this just shows this AI arms race is not slowing down. It's accelerating. And there's one person that when he talks, you listen. He's wearing a black leather jacket. His name's Jensen.
We got to get more on Nvidia, the stock story of the day. The stock's still down. It's about 3%. Christina, you've been on the call. We're going to ask you what you heard.
We've heard before Jensen Huang say that China's worth $50 billion. He reiterated that. But what was surprising is that he said the Chinese market could grow literally 50% year over year like they've seen in other markets. He also pointed out, and I quote, "I think the opportunity for us to bring Blackwell to the China market is a real possibility." Blackwell is the next iteration of chips that are more advanced than the H20s. There have been rumors that they've been working on a specific B31. So Jensen Huang, the CEO, is insinuating that they may get the green light from the White House to ship even more advanced chips to China, which would definitely be an extra stream of revenue so that they could tap in to that $50 billion market. Guys?
All right, Christina, thank you very much. Bring back in Susquehanna Financial Group's Chris Rowland with more. You've been listening in. What's your take on that, China, or anything you want to talk about?
Yeah, I mean, Jensen has made some really big claims around total CapEx and the opportunity for AI, and talking about hyperscalers doing trillions in CapEx with them potentially should get the market enthusiastic, I think. Additionally, we've been combing through the 10Q, and we found that there was a 23% customer. So someone is buying almost a quarter of NVIDIA's entire revenue, which is going to be very interesting to dig into who that is.
Chris, thank you very much. Really appreciate your flexibility and time tonight. Dan, Nathan?
Yeah, the customer concentration, I mean, it could be, XAI or something. I mean, like at the end of the day, we know that there's 5 or 6 big buyers that could be OpenAI. You just have all these data center builds. The problem that I have right now with the stock is that, you're not seeing a huge reaction one way or another to this data center miss, but we haven't seen data center misses, right? And so if they start to see, I don't know, slow down in CapEx, if you start to see issues as it relates to China, I mean, the idea that they're going to start shipping Blackwell when they're not even shipping the H20s there right now, and this is in the middle of this trade dispute with China, I'm not sure this gets much better. Yeah, they're taking a VIG, but at the end of the day, this is rare earth materials versus AI chips, and I'm not sure who has the leverage here right now, and I don't.
Paul, the thing we can't ignore, of course, is the Nvidia earnings. I say that, but the after-hours move wasn't huge. Nasdaq futures actually pairing earlier losses as we get closer to the European Open here. So how do you put the Nvidia story in context for us?
Yeah, good morning, Anna. I think, it's a really interesting question, and way to look at it is the idea that Asia's markets really didn't respond all that much at all to what we saw with Nvidia. Remember, we built this as a really big risk event. Implied volatility was suggesting there could be really major swings either way based on what the earnings showed, and indeed, it did drop quite a long way, around 3% in after-hours trading in the US, but the knock-on impact for broader markets doesn't seem to have been all of that great. I think there's a couple of things to think about. One, the earnings really weren't all that bad. There's some uncertainties in there, and that's part of what made them look a little bit weaker, the fact that they excluded China from there altogether. And two, even then, the size of their earnings is still pretty phenomenal, all else being considered. I think that Asia's markets had an extra fillip because Nvidia is a bit worried about what it can do in China. That is opening space for the Chinese technology companies to also come in, and so they had another good day. But all in all, the market was happy enough with that and focusing on other things.
This is a case of, if you're used to great, good often just isn't good enough.
I 100% agree with you. And, we do this with NVIDIA a lot. And I think it's really, the pressure on the most publicly valuable, publicly traded company in the world and so on. But let's talk about these numbers. So $54 billion in sales forecast. So we're talking about the guidance for the current quarter that we're in now. I mean, it didn't miss expectations. That was in line mostly with expectations, just because some, bullish voices out there were looking for more than $60 billion. I don't think that this should be treated as AI trades out the window under, a lot of stress at the moment. So I think we need to be a little bit careful with some of the headlines that we are seeing this morning. So that's one thing. And does it actually signal something that goes beyond this particular quarter and the year? I mean, we keep talking about the virtual virtually monopolistic market position for Nvidia. So I think it's a little too early for that. But what's your take?
Yeah, so I think you talked about it a couple of seconds ago, right? The things to be watching, and I think the key touch points for this set of earnings is one, on the data center front, revenue came in a little bit lighter than I think some investors would have liked, and that's important, right? Because this all speaks to the data center buildup and whether demand is still there, and whether or not, as Sam Altman was saying or warning just a couple of days ago, we are in an AI bubble, right? Is this thing peaking, or is there more to go? So I think data center ramp is something very interesting to watch. The other key touch point, I think, is China.
Yeah.
Didn't sell any H20s in the second quarter, didn't include H20 sales in their outlook, which would be for the future, right? Which raises a lot of questions about how much they're going to be able to sell into China and derive revenue from China at a time when technically and legally, hey, the Trump administration just decided a couple of weeks ago H20 chips can go back into China, but it's China now saying, hold on, I'm not so sure. Back doors could be a security risk for us, Chinese national security risks. And by the way, we're trying to do it ourselves in any case, and we're telling our guys, don't buy U.S., but buy local and try and build local.
Yeah, so how Jensen Huang manages this somewhat, I don't know, not so friendly lines that are coming out of Beijing is going to be really critical, whether China's demand stays intact for Nvidia's H20 chips. But I think there were some reports suggesting out there, and it didn't really receive too much attention than the ones, that talked about that 15% of China revenue going to the U.S. government per se. But, things were not ready in terms of the paperwork, getting that necessary licensing coming from the Trump administration when it comes to resuming sales of H20 chips to China. So I think that's one thing that we need to pay attention to. And let's just simply talk about the demand going forward. So from that press release of Nvidia, sure, no H20 sales to China in the second quarter. However, they did release $180 million worth of release chips to a customer outside of China. So, there is that demand. I think Wedbush was talking about the demand supply ratio being like 10-1 or something. So they're not meeting demands. And I think that should be the fundamental story that should be better understood. But of course, I'm just a reporter very much interested in AI chips as well. But you know what? Let's pose that question.
As am I. So I tell you what, though, I want to add on to that, Terry, if I could, right? Bill Bishop, whom we've spoken to on this show, right? Cynicism, etc. Picked up on what you were talking about. NVIDIA benefiting from $180 million worth of a release of previously reserved H20 inventory. This is from approximately $650 million in unrestricted H20 sales to a customer outside of China. And Bill ends this by saying, I wonder which customer. So I think this speaks to skirting sanctions, maybe some smuggling going on, third countries. I don't know.
As you take a look at these numbers, what is standing out to you the most? We have the beat on the top and the bottom, but we do have that slight miss. What's going to be the biggest driver here?
Yeah, I mean, clearly this has been a year of major awareness and appreciation of kind of this gigantic AI infrastructure push. It's game theory, it's sovereign, it's global. And NVIDIA has been kind of both a pioneer of this and a leader of this. And so, this late in the earnings season, there was obviously a lot of really solid hyperscaler and other announcements, Meta, Google, you name it, like kind of just nonstop demand and announcements of new data, even XAI back in Memphis, where I'm from. And so, obviously there's a lot of expectation of like how much pull through they get. So there's the future demand versus like the current deployment. And so ultimately, we're seeing, with these numbers, obviously still, clarity needed for China, But and also how much offsetting of that will be from areas like the Middle East and other areas around the world and the existing hyperscalers. And of course, what does this mean for the rest of the AI ecosystem? But again, Nvidia is one of many players out there.
They certainly are. So a lot of things to address there. Let's first start with the China story, since this is a big one. On the call, they've already said they did not include the sales of H20 in any of the Q2 numbers or in any of their outlook here and in their guidance and forecasting. How much are they going to address the China business on the call, do you think?
I don't think they can avoid talking about China at this point, given the importance to the company. And also just, politically, everybody is going to have all, eyes and ears on it, especially whether it's from the impact of the export tax, so let's call it that, the end market. Again, I'm also interested in areas like their new Jetson Thor chip, right, where, focus on robotics. And so, again, those are earlier innings areas, but again, they just came out with their new model for that. Right now, not very meaningful production. So again, if you think back to Nvidia back in October 2022, I was one of the few bulls left, talking about their opportunities ahead. So I think, we can miss the forest for the trees focusing on a single quarter. Obviously, I think everyone knows, you've looked at other companies reporting after hours today, like Pure Storage and Snowflake. Snowflake, no surprise, obviously, because we saw MongoDB report yesterday. So, kind of surprising it didn't move more in tandem today. But again, the AI story and this infrastructure growth is in full swing. Going back to what we should expect on the earnings call is, what share of CapEx dollars they're getting from this. And also, is it all hyperscalers? How's the sovereign playouts going? Any commentary there? And again, I'm also interested to see what he says beyond that too. Again, it's the biggest lever for them right now. But again, given where things are going, and let's call it embodied AI, edge AI, and let's call it even the inference economy, I think people should start to be thinking a little bit more what comes beyond data center plays. Not saying that there isn't still like a multi-year runway ahead, but I think this inference economy of actually deploying AI in the real world, the connectivity, cybersecurity, all these components. Nvidia really is a leading indicator there. But again, I think we should start looking at the opportunities beyond that. And I think this earnings, so far it's kind of flat down a little bit. We'll wait on the earnings call, but I think regardless, it's a good time for people to start thinking beyond that.
And if they are thinking beyond that, Zeno, where might they look?
Yeah, I mean, look, you've got other semi players, right? Even the hyperscalers themselves are, building their own competitors. So we're looking at, let's say, for example, they just came out with that new Thor robotics platform chipset server. So they announced partners for that. Advantech, Infineon. Meta's partnered with MediaTek, which is the 5th largest fabless semiconductor in the world. AMD. Also, you don't have AI without Taiwan Semiconductor at this point, but you could have AI without Nvidia. It would be a blow. But again, there are a lot of important companies down the stack. Companies like Foxconn, right? They used to be the blue chip provider that everyone just associated with Apple. Now they're working to build servers for Apple and Nvidia. They're seeing margin expansion. They're seeing new markets appear. So again, I think it's time to start exploring areas that haven't really seen the valuation uplift, but they're at kind of, let's call it the tipping point for seeing a lot of pull through. And this earnings season has been pretty much phenomenal for the rest of the AI ecosystem, including robotics, which is kind of the area we focus on a lot.
Well, and it's interesting you bring up robotics. I'm not sure if you heard my conversation with George Tillis when we were breaking down the earnings, but, we were taking a look at their automotive revenue, which, in terms of section is obviously not a huge driver for them. But like you just brought up, they have this new Jetson Thor chip, which will go into these humanoid robots. And how influential is that going to be? I know this boom of data centers is what we're talking about right now, but I feel like the side conversation that everybody's talking about is the rise of robots, and particularly these humanoid robots, even for a company like Nvidia, who obviously has the capability to do it, how much of a driver is that going to be? How influential could it be for companies like Nvidia and others?
Yeah. So again, it takes a village, and again, just because you have the chip, that's just one component. You have sensors, you have actuation. There's a lot of components to go into robots. Let's not even isolate it to humanoids. Let's call it all kind of automated real world form factors. So like just back of the envelope math, if you had a billion humanoids, that's a big number, but let's just call it a billion robots, and they all had this Thor on it. I think he's doing bulk pricing for like 3K. Let's be more realistic. That drops to 2.5, 2K. I mean, adding the other components, you're looking at a $5 trillion tech stack in terms of the underlying tech for that. And that's, going into drones, autonomous vehicles, and we really are about to see new platforms appear here. So if you have autonomous vehicles and autonomous drones, they can now do overnight logistics and do automated warehouses. So again, think more, what is the point of all of this AI investment? It's not just so we can chat in a web browser. It's new interfaces like Meta's wearable wrist sensors that can understand intent and do augmented reality and eliminate the need for other peripherals like mice and touchscreens and keyboards. So we really are like there's a human tech interface and then a tech stack that's built kind of by AI and robots for AI and robots, and that's really what we look at with at Robo Global. And we have, as an example, our Think TH&Q strategy and our ROBO strategy, which was the world's first robotics index and ETF that was launched back in 2013. So this is, an area we've really been looking at for a long time, is the convergence of all these areas coming together and not really kind of following the hype, but like actually watching where adoption is coming from.